I think in a couple of years will be mainstream, where we do not only look at one gene, but we look at all the genes, and then we have a much more realistic picture of what the intestinal tract will do. And I think that will help us in the long run, say in the next 10 years, to really come up with measures where we can say, yeah, this microbiota is doing all right, or this microbiota, well, somehow we need to support the good guys versus the bad guys.
Hello, everyone. My name is Doug Corver. I'm one of the hosts of the Poultry Podcast Show. Welcome to our latest installment. If you find this interview interesting, please let us know by visiting our website at wisenetics.com. While you're there, you can also learn more about all our podcast segments covering poultry, swine, dairy, beef, feed milling, and even pet food. And you please feel free to suggest a new guest as well. Our guest today is Dr. Ruediger Hauck. He is an associate professor at Auburn University, and he has a shared appointment at the Department of Pathobiology in the College of Veterinary Medicine, and also in the Department of Poultry Science in the College of Agriculture. Welcome to the program, Ruediger.
Hello, Doc. Thank you for having me.
Can you tell us a little bit about your background? What led you to working in poultry? I know you're a veterinarian, so did you get into veterinary medicine first and then poultry science, or how did you come about your career in poultry?
Well, in a way that was accidental. So I realized during vet school that I didn't really want to work with live animals or too many humans. And of course, that's really important when you work in veterinary practice. And so I thought I'd work with, parasitology, virology, pathology, all these fun lab things. And the Poultry Diseases Institute, they did all that under one roof. So I could do one internship with them for a couple of weeks and see all these techniques. And then I thought I might decide where to go. And well, I stayed on, did my Ph.D. and became a postdoc, and at one point became a professor. So there was no big master plan. It just happened.
Elevate animal performance with Berg & Schmidt Animal Nutrition, your trusted ally in excellence. Their high-quality feed ingredients like coated nutrients and fat powders provide ruminants with extra energy, boosting health, productivity, and cost efficiency. Unleash your herd's potential with Berg & Schmidt.
That's great. Looking at your CV, you've had a lot of different experiences in Germany and in the United States. What were some of the key experiences that you had and opportunities that you had as you went through these different organizations?
I don't know if that's a key experience, but the one that is certainly the exception in my CV, and because of that, the most interesting, I think, was the 1.5 year, something like that I had at the German FDA, which is, well, everything else was an academic career. And that was really interesting. I mean, I got insights how the administration of a big state works. I attended meetings in Brussels, sometimes with a German delegation, the lower level meetings, obviously, but still I went there. And these were some incredibly interesting insights. I didn't want to do it for the rest of my life in the end, but I don't want to miss that time either.
Yeah, sometimes it's important to know what we don't want to do with our career as well. So, and the experience was probably invaluable in your career now.
Absolutely. I mean, it kind of took away the feeling I don't want to work with administration. And the higher you are as a professor, of course, administration becomes a bigger part. And then I picked up some techniques of dealing with these challenges. And generally, as a citizen of a free state, I think it's a good experience to know how the state is run.
So let's talk about your research now. Much of your work focuses on enteric health. Can you give a brief description of what enteric health means?
Oh, I gave a presentation 1 year ago about enteric health, and there is really not a good definition of that. There are several parameters that people traditionally look at, like lesion scoring, of course, gross pathology, which is lesion scoring, there are fancy laboratory tests. Maybe you've heard about the FITSI test, where you gavage birds with some fluorophore, and then, which is pretty big molecule size, and then you take blood and see how much has been taken up, and it should be not as much if the gut is not leaky. That would be one lab test. And of course, in the recent years, everyone is looking at bacteria of microbiota. And this is a test that I think has a potential in the future, but where we are right now, it only allows us comparing two groups, but it does not give us an absolute measure to say if it's enteric health or not. So this is what it makes things fascinating for me, because there is exactly not a clear-cut definition of enteric health.
Yeah, I heard you recently say at a conference that there is no normal chicken microbiota. What do you mean by that?
That with the knowledge of today, we cannot look at the composition, at least at the taxonomic composition of the intestinal microbiota of a chicken, and say, that is healthy, this is how it's supposed to be, and the other chicken, something is off, that is a diseased chicken or not. So you cannot predict what it will look like, the microbiota will look like. And on the other hand, looking at the microbiota, you cannot predict if this is a healthy intestinal tract or not.
Yeah, I've heard it said that it's maybe less important to know exactly who is present in the microbiome and more important to know what they're doing. Do you agree with that statement?
I totally agree. And this will be the next step. That's an ongoing research project we are looking at. So right now, the most common method to look in the intestinal microbiota is looking at one gene of the ribosomal RNA gene, and then we can detect what taxon, what species is there, sometimes only even what genus is there. And this is a taxonomic composition that I just said. And we can deduct from that, well, if there's lactobacillus, they can do this and they can do that. And this might be way more helpful. They did this in humans more than 10 years ago now. They looked at the taxonomic composition that varied wildly. As I said, there was, for humans, no normal intestinal microbiota either. But they looked at the function. And that was pretty constant across various ages and I think even continents. And I think when we do that for chickens, we will learn that as well. Right now, we are doing this ribosomal typing and we are deducting it. But there are newer techniques which are right now far more expensive, but I think in a couple of years they'll be mainstream, where we do not only look at one gene, but we look at all the genes. And then we have a much more realistic picture of what the intestinal tract will do. And I think that will help us in the long run, say in the next 10 years, to really come up with measures where we can say, yeah, this microbiota is doing all right, or this microbiota, well, somehow we need to support the good guys versus the bad guys.
Yeah, and in connection with that, we talk about dysbiosis or dysbacteriosis. And those always seem to be quite vague concepts. And do we kind of use these terms maybe too casually, and we just say something is wrong, but we don't know exactly what either what's wrong or what we should be aiming for?
Yes, in a way. I don't know if casually is the right word, because I think the word dysbiosis, dysbacteriosis, it serves a purpose, because when you throw it out, everyone will have a rough idea of what the intestinal tract looks like. Now, this is, of course, not the dysbacteriosis, what it looks like, but it serves communicating with other veterinarians, with other enteric health experts. So in that sense, the word is okay. If you drill deeper, then of course, yes, we are using a word describing the microbiota and applying it to a gross lesion, and that doesn't fit. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a complex discussion to have. So really what it comes down to is enteric health can affect bird performance. It can affect food safety. We can measure performance. We can measure carcass contamination. But how do we understand the mechanisms involved between the microbes and those downstream effects that are really important for the industry?
Well, by collecting lots and lots and lots of data. Of course, the traditional approach, and that is still very prevalent, is just regarding it, as you said, as a black box. We are trying this, and we see what happens, and we may have hypotheses, but not a really good idea of why it happens. And this is very helpful. And I mean, we have come with poultry production and probably with other types of livestock very far just by this empiric approach. Now, what I envision is, and then we are doing steps in our lab, and we are not the only ones. Just collecting data, and every single trial kind of loses its importance. But you get these results, you publish them really detailed. You, for example, upload the sequences that you gather when you're investigating the microbiota. And then you are doing these holistic reviews, meta-analyses of different experiments, and you come up with rules that, they never apply universally, but you see connections that otherwise would be hard to detect. This might not, going back, tell you anything about a special case, because you will detect, there are interactions, and maybe the interaction in a special case that is interesting for my farm, for my feed mill, for my flock has not been investigated yet, but it gives us a much better basis to make decisions, maybe more targetedly test what we want to test, and instead of just, it might work, let's try it, but we would have a better reasoning to test it.
Mm-hmm. So we can maybe say in general terms that if we have good enteric health in our birds and our flocks, that we will most likely, under normal circumstances, also see good performance, and we will also maintain good food safety of those products.
I definitely would agree with the production. Yes, you won't have good production data with any impaired intestinal health. With the food safety, this is not my core area, so I'm just throwing that out. I'm not entirely sure if that is necessarily correlated to intestinal health, because think about salmonella. They can definitely be part of healthy intestinal microbiota, but still pose a risk for humans, obviously. So it might be a matter of definition. If you say this bird is salmonella positive, but it's growing really well, intestinal health, as we can see it, looks pristine. And then I would say, yeah, still, even though there are microbiota, Campylobacter even more than salmonella, yes, it is intestinally healthy. So to some extent, they need to be separated. There might be the same methods of looking into it, but they are not correlated, in my opinion.
I'd like to remind our audience that if you find this or any of our previous topics worthwhile and informative, please subscribe to the Poultry Podcast Show YouTube channel. And you can do this by clicking on the bell icon to receive our notifications. You can also share the video if you learned something new today. Ruediger, what specifically interests you about enteric health? Why has that been your career?
As you mentioned in the beginning, I had a couple of postdoc stations and in various institutions. And so I worked with quite a couple of poultry pathogens and got some experience. And when I was offered the position in Auburn, I had to decide where would I drill deeper. And I had some background with enteric health, with histomonas, which is, of course, more turkey disease, so I couldn't do that. And in Alabama, which is broiler country, it wouldn't have made much sense. But being broiler country, intestinal health seemed to be the most important one. So I my original plan was to work with coccidia, intestinal health, staying with a parasite and working on that. Respiratory health obviously is important as well, but there are very qualified colleagues in Auburn working with that. And so I thought for the interest of the whole university, it might be better to establish something different. And well, as a postdoc, I usually had worked on the pathogen side of things. So I had characterized the pathogens, I had sequenced them, I had worked on diagnosing them in a better way. And that was my original thought too, looking more at the coccidia themselves and less at the host. On the other hand, I've always had some interest in informatics and somehow just looking how things work together. And that, when I started, which was now 7 years ago, was when the microbiota research just started to take really off in the poultry world. And that was a niche which fascinated me. And of course, when you start looking at the microbiota, you are moving more to the host side. And so from a focus on coccidia in the beginning, it became more a focus on this enteric health, more looking how the host does than what the parasites do actually, how they function.
So in your research, how do you measure enteric health? What are some of the techniques that you're currently using?
Well, there's always the production side. I mean, we can have beautiful intestinal tracts. If the birds don't perform, that's pointless. So this is part of every experiment that we run. We do lesion scoring, but this is a rough thing to do. So our necrotic enteritis challenge model is a very mild one, and we consistently see significant impairment of production data. Lesions, we usually only see very mild ones. So we include it because it has to be included. I'm never really sure how much it actually tells us in the end. We do this FITC test that I explained in the beginning to see the intestinal, to measure the intestinal permeability, which at least in our hands, and I've heard about other labs that have similar experience, does not seem to be as sensitive either. So even when we have lesions, sometimes this test doesn't really show a reaction. And so it's a bit finicky. Of course, microbiota, that's another thing that we consistently do. This helps us compare groups. But as mentioned in the beginning, it really does not give us a good insight how these birds would compare to healthy birds in the field or not. And but we are collecting the data, we are uploading to the databases, and I think in the long run, that's will help. And we are doing RNA sequencing, looking at the transcriptome, which of course goes back to the reaction of the host. But the very same limitations apply as to the microbiota. We easily can compare groups, and we find some genes that are up or down regulated, some pathways that work differently. If that is a good thing or not, or maybe it's just neutral, that we don't know. And that would be the next frontier if I had even more people to work on, if I had the knowledge to do that, if I had the time to do that. Meta-analyses for microbiota, this is nothing new. It's not that common, but you're definitely not the first ones to do it. The next step would be, and we wouldn't be the first ones either, but I think we would be the first ones for poultry, to make a meta-analysis of gene expression in the intestinal tract, again with the same reasoning that maybe we can find a definition of what it should look like in a healthy bird.
So the field seems to be advancing very rapidly in terms of the technologies available and maybe the state of the art to measure enteric health 5 years ago is no longer relevant. How do you as a researcher evaluate these new techniques that come along? Often, it also requires expensive equipment. What are some of the things that researchers need to keep in mind as they use or consider novel technologies to study enteric health?
So my first impulse is always, oh, wow, that's cool. I want to do it. Um, that is just maybe one of the reasons why I'm academia, because it gives you more than in the industry opportunities just to try things without having an immediate plan of what to do. Of course, there is always the thought, can we do it? Do we have the knowledge? We usually don't if it's a new method. How difficult would it be to acquire the knowledge? And money-wise. This is something that as a researcher probably is not as important in the beginning because, well, in a couple of years, prices will come down, the knowledge will be wider spread, there will be easier tools that don't require as much technical knowledge. So I don't think, probably it's not a very good answer, but I'm really open to new methods, trying new methods in research. And then I leave it happily to the industry and to the diagnostic labs to sort out what they think is useful and what not. And I might develop some opinions along the way too.
Yeah, it's a challenge sometimes, but it's also interesting learning about new ways of getting a deeper insight into the microbiome and into enteric health. So, how long have you been at Auburn University?
7 years now.
And you have teaching and graduate student responsibilities there as well?
Yes, officially I have actually a 40% teaching appointment, which I don't really fulfill. So yeah, I'm teaching a class for undergraduate students. Well, it's for undergrad and graduate students. It's a piggyback class, Poultry Health, which was, I love teaching that class. It's fun to work with the students. In the beginning, it was a little bit frustrating because I had been lecturing at the vet school in Germany. And of course, vet students, they know a lot, but they are not interested in poultry. And then I thought, oh, well, now I have the poultry production students. They love poultry. But of course, what I didn't consider when I taught it the first time, that they have no knowledge about veterinary medicine. So it becomes, in a way, kind of introductory class to veterinary medicine or to medicine in general. But yeah, that's something I really enjoy. And well, while at the Ag College, we're talking about poultry health, I also give a couple of lectures at the vet school about poultry diseases. That's the fine difference between the two. But that's just 1 or 2 per year. And well, of course, I do have graduate students working in my lab. That's in the gray area between research and teaching.
Right. What's your approach to graduate student mentorship?
Keep them on a long leash. They are adults. They should know, and most of them do know what they want to do. And I can give them advice how to achieve it, but of course times are changing. So maybe my advice is not the most recent one. Personalities are different. So give them a lot of leeway. And that's for the classes they take mostly. For research, I usually do have good ideas of what they want to do, and we're working closely together on the experimental design, for example, and coming up together with something that makes sense. When the experiment is running, give them the support that they need, but try not to micromanage. I've been accused of micromanaging. I try not to do it. And then, yeah, I think everyone works best when they feel their work has an impact and they make a difference. And so really giving them the detailed instructions and just regarding them as a technician or as a computer to work on this would not give ideal results.
Our famous 3. Natural Biologics is using cutting-edge science to dig deeper into the poultry health challenges you face. By gathering scientific evidence, they identify the most effective combinations of natural ingredients that improve animal health. Visit naturalbiologics.com/poultry to see the newest research in both turkeys and chickens.
Maybe one last question before we finish up. Do you have a favorite microorganism? Is there one species that particularly interests you or fascinates you or challenges you?
Well, Histomonas still is extremely fascinating. I don't work with it really anymore, but there are so many questions about it, and this is on the parasite things, of the metabolism of the parasite. Why does it need these culture conditions that are really unusual? And this is something we haven't understood, and I have some results that we never came around to publish, but that show that theoretically it should work like everything else, and it just doesn't. So reading about that and maybe having cleared that up in a couple of years by someone else, that would be really fascinating, yes.
Great, thank you. So, Ruediger, thank you so much for joining us today on the Poultry Podcast Show. That was an enjoyable discussion.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I enjoyed it too. I always love talking about my work.
And thank you to our audience for joining us. If you enjoyed the interview, please give us a thumbs up on the platform you're using to view this podcast. I'm Doug Corver, and I'll see you next time on the Poultry Podcast Show.